Welcome everyone to the Planning High Availability Deployment with vCloud Automation Center. I'm Jason Holmberg, one of the product managers on the vCAC team. With me is Carl Prahl, who's a senior staff MTS here with VMware. Before we go any further, though, we always have to put our disclaimers up in case we decide to talk about something futuristic that, while it is something we're wanting to do or planning to do, we commit to nothing. And since we're talking about high availability and sometimes can be a drab and dreary subject, I figured we'd start off today with a picture of fireworks. Get everybody excited about what we're going to be talking about today. Setting up multiple machines and load balancers and SSO and Postgres and all that stuff. So just a little bit about us. Again, I am one of the product managers with vCAC. I focus on install, deployment, high availability, disaster recovery, kind of the areas of vCAC that we consider non-functional requirements. Carl?
And I'm Carl Prahl, and I mainly focus around performance and scalability for vCAC, but in addition to that, pretty much anything that system testing related, I've probably had my hands in. Thanks, Carl.
So we're going to do a quick overview of what vCAC is in case anybody here actually doesn't know why they're here. So we'll just talk about what's the purpose of it, what we focus on with the product. We'll do an architectural overview, the different pieces, where they play, and then we'll go through some high availability, HA limitations. And then talk about some of the prerequisites you need to be considering when you're deploying in an HA environment. And then finally, we'll go through some demos of deploying an HA, recorded videos, and to prevent anything from breaking. So unless the video player on the machine breaks, we're good. So when we talk, vCAC falls under the management offerings that VMware has. We have three main areas that we're focused on. The first is the on-demand self-service capabilities for delivering infrastructure and applications for customers. The second is providing the cost information, the transparency through the business management capabilities. And then the last piece is automating the monitoring and health of those applications and infrastructure that you're deploying, and not just on VMware architecture, but in a heterogeneous environment, so we can support other virtualization technologies, we can support multiple cloud technologies, basically any cloud, any platform. And if we look at kind of the architecture, everything is built on the VMware cloud infrastructure. But we're also focused on converged infrastructure from a physical standpoint. We're focused on other virtualization technologies, and we're focused on other cloud technologies as well. vCAC is that core piece that sits over it that provides the governance and the automation on top of it. We have the cloud operations piece that monitors and the health and provides the capabilities to remediate problems. And then finally, the business management suite, which provides the cost and allows you to run your IT organization like a business. From a vCAC standpoint, we're focused on three main areas. The first one is infrastructure automation. It's about automating the delivery of your infrastructure from as well as applications and desktops, providing the ability for you to provide self-service capabilities to the people that you support. The second piece is the application and, oh, I'm on the wrong slide. I'm talking to the wrong slide. Let's just skip. There we go. I had one too many slides in there. So infrastructure automation, we just talked about that. Application delivery and release automation. So this is, those of you that are familiar with what was vFabric Application Director, this is that core functionality, allowing you to design and model deployments, as well as moving towards being able to automate the release pipeline for the software products that you support. And the last is providing the abilities for you to become a broker of IT services, providing that self-service portal and the key capabilities to automate not just infrastructure services and application services, but going anywhere from deploying mailboxes to providing desktop as a service to providing database as a service. So that's vCAC. And let's take a look at the architectural overview from a simple deployment model. This typical deployment model, which we use for POCs, can be stood up in about 2 hours if everything goes well. We have a connection to an Active Directory or LDAP directory service in order to get the list of users that are going to be logging in. We have an Identity Appliance, or could be vSphere SSO, which connects to Active Directory. Then we have the vCAC virtual appliance, which also includes vCenter Orchestrator, which then communicates not only to the SSO appliance, but also communicates with your physical, virtual, or cloud infrastructure. We also have an Application Services virtual appliance, which used to be Application Director. We're not going to talk too much about that, mainly because it does have limited HA capabilities. And lastly, we have our Infrastructure as a Service component. This is a .NET-based architecture that utilizes IIS and Microsoft SQL. And as we go through our deployment scenario, we want to just make sure that what we're talking about is meant for a large enterprise that has the need to minimize the number of active, passive or failure points, requires a support 1 hour mean time to resolution, and minimize the number of single points of failure. This same environment that we're going to talk to can support up to 50,000 plus managed machines. We can handle 100 concurrent users, and what I mean by that is those are 100 users doing something in the application, not just 100 users logged in at one time. So they're actually doing something, doing a day 2 activity, clicking around, making requests, and supporting up to 100 requests per hour. To keep in mind, for those of you that have smaller deployments, you're not going to have to require HA throughout the application, most likely, or if you don't have those requirements, you can deal with a much smaller footprint.
And Jason, I just wanted to tag in one comment around the 100 requests an hour. It's actually much higher than that. That's just what I believe we had in our test information. Okay. But you'll be able to push through. It really depends on your fabric and what you're requesting. So if it's an ASD item, which, as Jason spoke about, pretty much the anything as a service, it's how long that takes. But overall, you could probably push 1,000 requests through the system at this scale.
Thanks, Carl. So now let's go a little bit more in depth to each one of these pieces, and we'll talk about the Identity VA first. This is the piece that provides the single sign-on capabilities for vCAC. It connects to your Active Directory or open LDAP system, and this is a piece that is required for vCAC to operate. Alternatively, you could use vSphere SSO if you have that already set up. There are some advantages and disadvantages to using one or the other, and we're going to talk about that in a few more slides. If you do decide to use the vSphere SSO, you need to be on 5.5 U1 or higher for 6.0. And we're going to be recommending to use vSphere 5.5 Update 2A when 6.1 releases, which is in about 2 weeks. And the reason for that, it includes a number of fixes that we require as we're transversing the forest when connected to AD, some performance enhancements. And they're not going to get those into that until that UTA release, which I think they're targeting for October. But I'll refer you back to that first slide we talked to. We're not committing to anything. The vCAC appliance, this is where we do our service catalog. These are the service catalog components. This is where we have the embedded vPostgres database. We also include an embedded VCO instance, which also has a vPostgres database. It includes a Tomcat web server, which is what we're using to serve up the web pages for the service catalog. And the vPostgres database contains your entitlement policies, your approval policies, your service definitions, your catalog items, and anything that's not an infrastructure as a service resource or an application service resource. So anything that was created, any resource that was created with the Advanced Service Designer inside of vCAC would be stored in this vPostgres database. Our IaaS resources are actually stored in Microsoft SQL. We have the Application Services Virtual Appliance, which has the Application Director, or what was formerly Application Director. And this provides the application delivery and release automation capabilities. This includes a Postgres database as well as a Tomcat web server. And we're not going to talk a lot about this today because today and with 6.1 it does not have HA support. Now we have the IaaS components, or the infrastructure as a service components. These are all .NET Windows-based components, and we start off with our Microsoft SQL database. This includes your business and fabric group definitions. It includes your IaaS blueprints. It includes your IaaS resources, as well as your endpoint definitions and your reservation policies. Those of you that are familiar with the application and you see an infrastructure tab, most of that is coming, all that data is coming from the Microsoft SQL database. We also have an IaaS website. So these are some ASP forms that provides the request forms for your infrastructure as a service components. It also serves up the administration capabilities focused on infrastructure as a service. This also communicates with the model manager of vCAC. The manager service, which is also Windows dependent, coordinates the communication between your agents and the database. And then we have the model manager that facilitates the integration between the business logic and execution on our DEMs. And we have two types of DEMs. We have a DEM worker and a DEM orchestrator. The worker executes the workflows where the orchestrator monitors and manages those workflows. And finally, we have agents based on the particular endpoint that we're connecting to. So we would have a vSphere agent or Amazon agent, et cetera. So going back at the simple deployment view, again, just to review, the Identity Appliance, the vCAC appliance, the IaaS components, and the App Services appliance. Now, if we're looking at a high availability deployment, you're first going to have your AD directory, and you're going to have possibly 2 SSO servers. This is currently limited to vSphere SSO, so if you have a requirement to have 2 instances of SSO behind a load balancer, you are required to use vSphere SSO, and you're also required to have the load balancer configured to utilize sticky sessions, which differs, that setting differs depending on the load balancing technology that they're using. Then you would have 2 or more vCAC appliances to spread the load out for your service catalog capabilities, and you'd also have an application services appliance. Then we move on to the infrastructure as a service component, where we would have our Microsoft SQL cluster. We would have at least 2 web components serving up the web forms. We would have 1 active manager service and 1 manager service that is on cold standby. We would have our DEM orchestrators, DEM workers also deployed, depending possibly up to 2 for each endpoint that you wanted to connect to, with the load balancers in between. So it's possible you may have up to 3 to 4 load balancers, 1 for SSO, 1 for the virtual appliances, 1 for the IaaS website, 1 for the manager service. You'll have at least 2 vCAC appliances. You'll have up to 4 IIS servers, 2 for the web, 2 for the manager service. You'll have 2x for any of the Windows servers for agents and DEMs. You may have an external vPostgres cluster, your Microsoft SQL Server cluster, and probably an external VCO instance to make this all go around. We do have some HA limitations with vCAC, so the best that we can do is a active-passive configuration. The manager service, we can't have 2 instances running, so if that ever fails, it's going to be a manual process to do the failover. For vPostgres, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth a little bit later in the presentation about the options there. We can utilize the vCAC appliance as our database server by shutting down the other services. We have a knowledge base entry to set up replication between those. If there is a failover, that would be, again, a process of restoring a database server, requiring some type of manual process. There is an option for you to use open source Postgres for your Postgres database, and in that case you could use third-party tools to provide active-active functionality, but those, again, would not be While we would support vCAC, if there was database communications, that would be something that GSS might not be able to help. So when we talk about supportability, it's basically, the product is always going to be supported in certain scenarios. It's just when does that support stop? When is GSS going to have to step away and say, look, I don't have the knowledge to be able to help you with that. And lastly, we have the vSphere SSO versus the Identity Appliance. Now, again, vSphere SSO ships with vSphere. Updates are shipped with vSphere. So if there's a bug within SSO that you need fixed, we're going to be having to work with the vSphere team in order to get that addressed and rolled out. This does include replication, which allows you to set up the multiple instances of SSO behind a load balancer because it's replicating the data it has between the different nodes. And again, configured for multiple, and that's the reason why we can configure those for multiple instances. If we choose to use the Identity Appliance, this does ship with vCAC. Any updates are delivered by the vCAC team or shipped with vCAC. This does not have the replication capability, so we're limited to having only one instance. And for HA requirements, at that point, we're using something like vSphere fault tolerance versus having multiple instances behind a load balancer. Carl, I'd like you to talk about certificates.
You log into your machine, too. Okay. Anyways, I wanted to start by going over the best practices for certificate generation for vCAC. For security purposes, we recommend that certificates are generated using a subject alternate name, and you just populate that with all the servers' host names which will exist behind the balancer. It's not saying you can't just generate wildcard certs. That's also supported as well. We also recommend that separate certificates are generated for each tier because in reality, vCAC is just a 4-tier app now, and you would need a cert for each one. And please, if you have the chance to do this, deploy the product using production certs. If you utilize temporary certs, whatnot, that you're going to replace later on, we do support it. You can change them. It's just a failure-prone process. And as always, all certificates should be trusted by the end user, so they're not getting the certificate warnings. As for certificate generation, this has overall been a rough topic that we've dealt with multiple times with KBs and whatnot. So basically, the certificates should utilize public and private certificate authorities, or certificates issued by public and private authorities are supported. So you could go out to VeriSign, whatnot, and get a cert. Or you can utilize an internal cert server. In addition, I have included a KB that deals with generating a certificate with OpenSSL. That will be provided, so you can take the link whenever the PowerPoints are up online. And I've also included a sample configuration file that deals with how to populate a certificate and get the subject alternate names included. In addition, for load balancers right now, as of 6.1 and 6.0, we have qualified the product using F5 load balancers, and we are in the process of publishing a white paper, which should be out in the next few months. But once again, like that first or second slide announced, can't commit to anything. And pretty much across the board, well, at least for the vSphere SSO and for the vCAC appliance, you need to enable sticky session, which depending on your load balancer maybe have different terminology, session persistence, whatnot. And I did want to show a quick demo of just going through a pre-deployed F5 instance and basically cover the different portions you need to configure. So I'm just going to log in. If you're not familiar with F5, it's one of probably the top enterprise load balancers out there. Anyways, from a base instance, you'll have to import the certificates. These are the same certificates that you'll be utilizing for each tier. So you'll import your virtual appliances certs, your infrastructure web certs, your manager service certs, and the SSO certs. Yep.
Can we use NSX load balancing is the question. There shouldn't be any reason why you couldn't. It's just we want to just show an example, and we're using F5.
So anyways, you can see all the different certs which have been added that have been used to set up the system I'll be covering later, one for each tier. Continuing on, you will need to also create various profiles for the SSL search. You'll need a client and server. Those will be selected later on as you're creating your virtual servers, your pools, etc. You'll add each of the nodes here. But overall, right now we are working towards in the F5 documentation covering how we will handle health checking. Right now, we don't have any published documentation on health checking. You can go out, and there's various URLs exist in the product you can configure for health checking, but as it is, it's nothing published yet. The one thing I did want to additionally cover, if you define the location, is the infrastructure manager. This is the part where, or the manager service, you will need to do a manual failover. So in the case of a failover, let me see, is this where it is? Here we go. No? Oh, there it is. Anyway, so as you can see, it's set up in an active passive mode here. So in the case of a failover, you will actually have to come to the load balancer, flip the nodes, start the manager service on the machine that it's going to become active on, and then your work items, your provisioning, et cetera, will continue on. But as I said, we will have a white paper published shortly on this. And what I wanted to continue on is just run through the installers and show you what settings you need to provide during installation and overall just to help alleviate confusion that may come with the installer. The high-level flow is that you'll configure an SSO or identity virtual appliance. And at this point, as Jason said, you have the choice to make of whether or not you're going to use the, if you want HA, you have to go with the vCenter SSO. If you're fine with fault tolerance, you can use the identity VA. Then you'll deploy the vCAC vPostgres instance, which we'll talk about more later on. Following that, you'll deploy your first VCA VA, and configure it, after which you'll deploy additional second, third, whatnot. You can configure an external VCO, and later on, you'll replace the settings that would use the internal. Then you start deploying the IIS components. And here's roughly, this is the vCAC virtual appliance tier of the product. So you'll have your Cafe virtual appliance load balancer, which is, Cafe is sort of an internal name. This is just, and you'll have at least 2 appliances behind it. In addition, you'll have your vPostgres database cluster and your SSO appliance. And Jason's going to talk about your vPostgres options here.
So again, if we go back to the architecture, the vPostgres database is part of the vCAC appliance that stores our approval policies, entitlements, catalog item definitions, service definitions. We have 3 different options that you can go with. We have the standard, or the standalone vPostgres appliance, which is separately licensed. The caveat with that, if it hasn't already gone to an end of availability point, it will be shortly. That being said, if it's no longer available and you do own it, it is still supported until February of 2016. This is supported with vCAC with the 9.2.x version, and it is supported by GSS. And when I talk about the database side, we're talking DBA-like support, but that's supported by the vPostgres team, not by the vCAC team. This does support active-passive configuration for HA. Another option that you have is to use an embedded vPostgres, the embedded vPostgres database. You can actually set this up where you include another 2 vCAC appliances, shut down some services, set up some replication, and in that case, we can do an active-passive configuration. This configuration is supported by GSS, and they do provide some limited DBA type of support, and that's through the vCAC team. And this would be supported and follow the same support lifecycle as vCAC does. And then the last option that we do have is the open Postgres, where there's a number of, you got your entire open Postgres support community, third-party tools. This configuration is also supported with vCAC. However, GSS would not be providing any type of DBA support. So if you had a backup question or a failover, or how do I do this, you're going to be limited to the open source community versus coming to VMware for support in that configuration. From a support date, I mean, that doesn't really apply here. But however, there are tools to set up an active-active configuration, again, if you decided to use open source Postgres. If you wanted to set up the embedded vPostgres, we have a couple of knowledge articles out there to help you do that. But the process is basically deploying 2 additional vCAC appliances. It requires you to disable your VCO service and your VCA services that are through SSH. You have to do some user configuration on both the Postgres user, making sure that they have SSH capabilities. You have to configure Postgres to listen. Right now, it's configured to just listen on the internal appliance IP. So you would have to configure it to what IP addresses you want it to listen for. And you also have to create and configure a replication user. And then finally, there's configuring of slave nodes. And again, we have 2 articles to help with this setup. The first one is to set the steps required to set up the replication between 2 instances of embedded vPostgres. And the last one is actually, if you've already deployed vCAC and you wanted to use the embedded, you can use this knowledge article to move the vCAC database from one vPostgres instance to another. So have that documented. Also, I wanted to touch a little bit around the differences between deploying multiple vCAC appliances between 6.0 and 6.1. With 6.0, it's a fairly manual process that talks about copying files between one appliance and another, changing ownership on those files, making some configuration settings and some configuration files. This is all documented in the vCAC 6.0 documentation under distributed installation. We've changed that with the release of 6.1, again, coming out, in 2 weeks, where you go to the VAMI UI of the appliance and you just say, point me to the lead node. It does all that copy and configuration for you. And then also, you still have to manually shut down the services you don't want to use. Like if you're using an external VCO instance, an external vPostgres instance, you probably want to disable those services just to free up the resources on that box.
And so just to add in there, just in case there may be any confusion, given by the name leading cluster node, it's not sort of any primary or master node. It's just the first node you configure, and we'll go over that shortly.
Okay.
So we're going to do a few quick demos of just deploying the product in HA. We're going to start with the virtual appliance, and we'll also cover things such as checkpoints that you should make at certain points during the installation to make sure it's been successful. So right here is just configuring the vCAC appliance. Running. Logging in, of course. But the first thing we'll be doing once you log in is that on the vCAC settings tab, you'll be providing the load balancer host name, or the load balanced VIPS host name for the vCAC appliances. In this case, mine is demo vcacva.sqa.local. In addition, you'll be importing your certificates. These are the ones I covered earlier about how to generate, and in this case, yeah, there they are. copying the private and public key, or the private key and the certificate chain. But as I mentioned earlier, these are the ones that contain the subject alternate names. The common name doesn't really mean anything once those have been specified. Once this is done, we'll be configuring the database. And this is just the databases could represent your vPostgres cluster, whatever. It's just it's any of those. So you just based on the decision you made earlier, you'd be putting in that endpoint. In addition, prior to the installation, there's steps in our documentation. You do have to pre-create a database, but the database does get populated by the installer. And then you tie it up with your SSO server. So once this has been configured and run, you're at the point where you could actually log into the product and with your first machine behind a load balancer. And I'm just going to skip over this because it can take a while. Let's see. Anyways, so after the services are started, you'll be able to view the services coming up on the default page, the services registered service, and that will start up going. You'll see 0 initially, then 5, 6, 7, whatnot. And once there's 20, you'll know that the appliance can be logged into. So this is a good place to make your first check at the product state. And you will notice that I didn't go through licensing. That can be done at any time. So here, the user is able to log in, or the default administrator is able to log in. You'll see the product's working. At this point, you know that your SSO is set up properly, and your vCAC appliances are set up, or your first vCAC appliance is set up properly behind a load balancer. The next demo I'm going to go into just quickly covers what Jason covered on the previous slide around clustering the appliances. So as he mentioned, in 6.1, we added instead of having to run through a bunch of error-prone steps, users are now able to just log into the second appliance, specify the first appliance, and hit a button, and it clusters it for you. At that point, the node is available for use. And this is something that could be done, say, if you need to scale out, et cetera, add another VM. This can be done at any time. It's just as simple as that.
So if you are looking at doing an HA deployment, wait 2 weeks until 6.1's released.
So much like the other one, the services will come up slowly. And when they're up, this node is available to log into. Okay, next I wanted to talk about the infrastructure as a service portion of the product, and in its own context. Anyways, you have the vCAC, you have the IS Web Load Balancer, you have the IS Manager Service Load Balancer, which, as mentioned before, is active-passive, and both of those have two IS boxes behind them. You also have your SQL cluster, which we also support mirroring, whatever your choices of, however you've configured a SQL server. In addition, you'll have your external agents and DEMs. And for high availability, you just configure a second one. But for agents, for high availability, what you do during the installation is when you're prompted for the endpoint, you'll actually just use the same one as you did on the previous agent, and that will enable the agents to both load balance requests and have active-active failover. What I was going to start with is going in for a demo of the deploying of the IS. I'm just going to cover installing the model manager web, model manager data, and the database. So these should usually be done on your first website that you install. And as you're probably all aware, the installer is located on the virtual appliance. Okay, so after accepting the EULA, you're prompted for your appliance login information. You'll notice that this is using the first virtual appliance that was deployed's host name. That's because that's where I downloaded it from. This doesn't affect your HA installation at all. It's nothing to really be concerned of. The installer basically writes some information back to that virtual appliance in the case of install failure. So when the installer launches up, a bunch of data will be pre-populated. Next, you'll be prompted to select complete or custom install. In this case, I'm going to be doing a custom install. The complete install will be used for the simple deployment Jason showed earlier. In this case, I'll be installing the database, website, and model manager data. So for the component registry server, what you provide is the load balanced host name of the virtual appliances, and alongside the administrator credentials. And for the IaaS server, you provide the load balanced host name for the infrastructure web. Pretty much at any point in the installation, if you're not inputting a load balancer's host name, you're probably making a mistake. And as you can see, I've pre-installed the certs, so they're here. And this is just in the database. The next thing that will be run is our prereq checker, which will validate all the prereqs on the local system and provide you hints on how to fix them. In this case, I've met all the prerequisites. Various login information. Keep in mind that this passphrase, it has a rather large warning underneath it. Remember that value. It's something we can't recover if you forget it. And it's necessary, it's used during encryption of various strings into the database. Once the infrastructure site's been installed, I fast forward the installer here. And once the infrastructure site has been, or the infrastructure web, the first one has been deployed, that's when you can really start using the product as a whole, start configuring values in it. And in this case, I'll just show you how to do a quick health check on the installation.
I think you hit demo 3, not demo 2.
I did?
Yeah.
So basically, the health check that I'm going to just be performing is configuring the default tenant with an identity store and adding a user to both as a tenant administrator and infrastructure administrator, and then logging in with them. So here I'll be specifying the identity store. This is just one of our pretty simple, not that big of an identity store. It's just used for testing. But you have to input the type, URL, domain, login user DN, etc. And here I'm just adding the auto.admin user as both a tenant admin and a infrastructure admin. And then I will be logging in as that user. And so what this process really just shows at this point is that the overall core of the product that's been installed is functional. You're able to log in as a user and view the infrastructure pages. And that shows you that at this point you have a functioning SSO, vCAC, and web all configured behind load balancers. And make sure when you're running this test to click on the infrastructure tab and just make sure the page loads. Once you've completed this check, you know the system's healthy and you can install your manager service now and then your agents, and at which point you're ready to configure the rest of the product and start provisioning machines. So just to quickly go over the manager service, its installation. Skip ahead a little bit. You basically just have to input the IIS server's website. So in this case, it would be the demoweb.sqa.local, which is the load balancer, and specify your cert. In addition, for your first manager service node, you will select it being an active startup. All this really does is sets the service to be auto start and starts it. On the other hand, if you select the disaster recovery node, it sets it to disabled, so it won't start automatically. If a failover was to occur, you will need to flip the load and add the secondary machine to the load balancer and start the service on the secondary machine. Make sure to stop the first service if for some reason it's still running. And Jason?
So in conclusion, we just want to make sure that you understand that the smaller footprint can be used for smaller implementations. So just keep that in mind, large versus small. What is your actual requirements? We're limited to a current active passive configuration with the major points being the manager service, SSO, and vPostgres. Each one of the SSO and vPostgres, there are options out there to raise the availability of those different services. But again, with the manager service, we are at this point going to be limited to an active passive configuration. There are 3 Postgres options out there: the vPostgres appliance, the embedded vPostgres, or the open source option. We have 2 SSO options, whether you want to use the Identity Appliance or vSphere SSO. And I think the one piece that from a deployment standpoint, especially on your Windows machines, make sure your prerequisites are ready. That'll make the install process go so much smoother when you have your Windows machines already configured. If you don't, you spend a lot of time going through what's not configured and all that. We do have a checklist coming with our 6.1 documentation that's going to help you step through, so you're not necessarily dependent on the prereq checker in order to do that. You can also run the prereq checker without installing anything. Just say, I'm going to install this on the box, and then just stop at the prereq checker point. It doesn't, so that the prereq checker, you can kind of get an idea where things are at before doing an install. So.
And just one other thing on the prereqs, there are various scripts floating around PowerShell scripts floating around on the web. So I'm sure a quick Google for vCAC 6.0 prereqs PowerShell will show one up.
Yeah. So that'll run on your Windows machine and cover everything. So, and lastly, again, we were talking about vCAC today. Please do not confuse when vRealize comes out. That is still that's vRealize automation. Those name changes and branding will be over the course of the next year. So vCAC becomes vRealize automation, and the software as a service offering is vRealize Air Automation. I think the other important piece is, I thought we were going to talk about vRealize VCO is becoming vRealize Orchestrator. And then Q3, again, is when the suite is going to be available for that offers different bundles with cloud, Log Insight, ITBM, vCAC, as well as vCOps. So with that, again, we'd like to open the floor up if you do have some questions.
Please go to one of the mics if you have a question.
Or I can repeat it. So the question is, you can't, so we can't set up the manager service for an HA active-active. Can you use fault tolerance in order to try to get active-active?
So you can, but in most times you'll be running a multi-CPU machine, and fault tolerance, once you get into multi-CPU scenarios, becomes...
So vSphere 6.0, you would be able to.
It requires a lot of bandwidth. But overall, you could probably script it to handle an automated failover on your own if you can detect the service is down. That's one way, but right now, yeah, it's just active-passive.
We have a gentleman at the microphone.
Hey, I do have a HA deployment in my environment, which is 6.0.
Okay.
This is question about the backup and restore. Can I ask that question?
Yes.
All right. So if one of the vCAC appliance corrupted and I have to recover from my backups, and then my backup happens once a day, and then the infrastructure as a service and then all the SQL server, they are fine. And then now I have a discrepancy, right? The vCAC backup is 24 hours old, but the rest of the components are fresh. In that case, how do I restore the environment?
So in that case, your main concern is going to be at the vPostgres side. So if you have the vPostgres set up for replication, you can get a pretty accurate or a pretty up-to-date copy of the database from that, where you're replicating from that slave node. So you would be able to restore that. We're going to have a document in the next probably month and a half that actually talks about how do I recover from a failure on my if my vPostgres database goes down. So again, hopefully in your HA deployment, you've externalized the vPostgres database. At that point, you're just putting in another appliance in its place and porting to the vPostgres database. And it's the vPostgres database that we need to worry about, and that's the manual movement of a database and into the new external one that may have failed.
But the data is old data, right? Because I'm recovering from the backup.
Correct, but if you use the replication that we talked about in the presentation, that's real time. Every time you add something to the vPostgres database, it's replicated to all those slave nodes. So you don't have to worry about your 24-hour backup because you're taking the copy from the slave node of the vPostgres database. So that's what the document that we have coming in the next month and a half is going to talk about how you would do that if you've set up the replication. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. Yes?
Yeah, is it supported, or is there a method or process to go from a non-HA configuration to an HA configuration?
So at this time, there's no supported process to undergo that. We recommend that if you want to start small, at least set up configure the product against
load balancers?
No, not necessarily load balancers. I'm running a complete blank, DNS entries.
Oh.
So that you can configure it against where you'll slap in the load balancer later on.
Okay.
Other questions out there? Will 6.1 support SQL always on? From our perspective, we'll support the product, and it's going to be, as long as we can see, SQL is going to take care of that for us. So yeah, as long as we don't care. Can we do this with multiple sites?
So what kind of multi-site deployment are you talking about? Right now, the current model that our deployment is you'd have the core of the product installed in one location, and then you'd have agents distributed worldwide. So you would have the vSphere agents or the DEMS, barring some work and customization.
So the manager service would be in a major hub. Having a switch over to a different site, I don't think we figured it's not supported.
So it could potentially be possible to have a fail to a different site, but at that point you would have to replicate the databases from one site to another. Because as the product stands right now, it's not as if you can configure like have the appliances in one location, IS in one location, have the same thing set up in another location. They all need to talk to a database in the end, and the latency would be too high unless you can replicate the content to a separate database server. Yeah, they don't even, dem workers can be utilized if you have some customization run with your configured in your system, because by default, they'll pretty much pick up any workflow. You need to utilize skills to be able to assign certain workflows to run to various locations, but there's some level of complexity in that. Really, the only thing that needs to be distributed at this time worldwide is the vSphere agents. And even that doesn't have to be done. They can run against it. It's just preferable to have them as close to the fabric.
Yeah, I think that the scenario I'm looking at, there's probably more code registration than each of the sites.
Okay. Any other questions?
Okay.
What are the browsers supported?
So with 6.1, IE 10, 11, 12, and then for Firefox and Google, it's usually the most recent and the most recent -1. So we'll support 2 versions of Firefox and Chrome, and then there's 3 versions of IE that we do support. I don't know the details of that, so we'd probably have to follow up later. Other questions out there? Yes, one more? Go ahead. Or not the last question, but go ahead. So the process of replacing certs is complicated, error-prone. It is something that we're looking at. One of the so are we working on areas to improve cert replacement? And the answer is yes. And part of that may be coming with the Platform Services Controller. I don't know if you guys have heard about that. The Platform Services Controller is being developed to handle SSO, certificate management, lookup service, and licensing for the entire vCloud suite. So we'll probably be subscribing to that when the Platform Services Controller comes out, which will ease a lot of that certificate replacement that's complicated today. Well, I haven't seen it yet, so that's why I'm saying probably. I'm sorry, can you repeat? Which load balancer? CAM load balancer. I mean, again, that's one of those things that if you can make it work, great. I mean, but you're not going to call, vCAC GSS to help you configure that, right? Yeah. Okay. It probably, as long as it works, right? I mean, it's just IP routing. I mean, we're going to support how do you create a catalog item, no matter what load balancer or Postgres option you choose. So. Oh no. Just if they tell you that, just say, hey, talk to the product manager and help me.
Yeah. F5 was just one of our biggest ones that was coming up with a lot of customers saying, how do we do this? And so that's why we're working on a white paper for it.
Right. No restriction on the load balancer. No restriction on support policy on the load balancer. Again, just it's like don't be. I wouldn't, if I was in your shoes, I wouldn't be calling vCAC support to tell them how to configure my load balancer or my database. I'd go to the people that are knowledgeable in that area, right? I'd go to vCAC to how to configure a tenant. Other questions out there? Yes, go ahead. Or I guess the gentleman at the microphone.
So the installation documentation for the distributed deployment indicates that the model manager data is only allowed on a single instance, but you didn't call it out as an active passive.
So, okay. So model manager data it's actually a one-time data import. It doesn't really exist on the machine. The installer just leaves some artifacts behind on the local machine. So it's not really something that needs to be worried about failover or anything. It's stored in the database. So it's just some stuff on the file system that gets left behind.
So if the node where that was installed is no longer running, the remaining nodes will continue to
Yep.
operate? Thank you.
You had a question?
Yeah, geographically dispersed data centers wanting to deploy vCAC. Also want to make this available to our NetOps teams, which like to use the like to do things in a dynamic fashion, continuous integration. They all want their own test environment. If they want to muck up API calls, they muck up something in vCAC, they want to reset it, deploy it. I'm looking for an automated CLI-based install process.
That is something that we're working on, but it's not there yet. I mean, we do have the IaaS components do, it's install shield, so it has command line capabilities there. We've had some people that actually have done scripts internally. It's just not product ready. So that might be something we could work out afterwards. I can check for you. Sure.
Yeah, that's probably something that we could put out there. I mean, we've done it in our labs. We have our CI, so we can just request a vCAC deployment. And I think that's what you're looking for.
Looking for replication for the production sites that are all identical.
Yep.
Right? Then looking for the development environments where we just redeploy.
Yeah. So the first part you mentioned, replication, what are you looking for there exactly? Like being
Consistent implementations first. So the base install of the entire virtual stack is the same, right? From vSphere, vCenter,
Okay.
down to folders, right? Push a button to deploy data center.
Okay.
Now, when you add autonomous sites running vCAC at each location, there are several things that get created by DevOps team at location A, say in the US. Well, guess what they want tomorrow? They want that same object they just created over an APAC.
Okay. So we'll work, start, after every, we'll give a card and see what we can do.
And like with vCloud directory, you've got the catalog, right? They can go out and they can create their VMs and stuff like that. They can publish and subscribe and the other regions get those.
And we do have a content library concept that's in the works that's targeted for next year that does the same type of thing. So. Other questions out in the back?
Microsoft clustering services be used for the service manager?
For the manager, so the question is, can Microsoft clustering services be used? The answer is probably. We just haven't tried it.
What one of the lead engineers told me with the manager service is actually due to a .NET bug that Microsoft hasn't fixed yet.
No.
No, that's not true?
No. It's
I'll have to tell me why.
yeah. Just to answer that part, the issue why you can't have two active manager services right now is because there's a chance they'll grab the same work item, which will lead to the likely case you'll see is that a machine will be stuck in provisioning eternally. If that's one way to tell you have two managers started.
Other questions out there? Yes. The only way that you'd be able to get active would be looking at the open source Postgres tools that are out there in the community. There's nothing that VMware provides for that. There's a knowledge article in that presentation that talks about the replication capabilities by using the embedded version of vPostgres. Yes. VMware will continue to support vPostgres for use in our internal virtual appliances. In most cases, that would be used to do real-time data computations and stuff, not something that needs to be backed up, replicated, used for historical purposes. So that would be, so the history of the vPostgres appliance is after February 2016. It's done with. Probably asking customers to move to probably open source Postgres at that point. Okay. And we probably should have put this thank you and then fill out a survey. Thanks, everyone.